With the NAWCQ right around the corner, I think we're almost due for the next ban list in the Yugioh TCG. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about some cards I think could be realistically hit on this upcoming ban list, and talking about some cards that maybe should be addressed. But at the end of the day, this is just a prediction and my opinion only. I could be completely wrong on this, and a lot of times, we as players don't really know what goes through Konami's mind when making these types of ban lists, so anything can happen. So do take everything I say with a grain of salt. But with all that being said, let's hop straight into it. Since the last one went so well, I'm actually going to be doing another giveaway for 3 copies of fuwalos from Rarity Collection 4. All you have to do to enter is 1. Be subscribed, 2. Like the video, and 3. Leave a comment saying what cards you'd like to see on or off this upcoming ban list. You can enter this contest no matter where you live around the world, and I'll be announcing the winner exactly 1 week from this video's upload time. I'll be pinning the winner's comment and then replying to it, so do check back in 1 week to see if you've won. Before we get on to the rest of the video, I just want to thank Card Trader for making this giveaway possible. They're the ones that sponsored it, and they're the ones that allowed me to keep doing giveaways like this for you guys. You can check them out using my affiliate link in the description below. By signing up and using code Tcg Sam for 5% off your order, you help support the channel, which also allows me to do more things like this in the future. Card Trader has been great from my experience. They're like an online marketplace, except they also offer an additional service. They allow you to combine shipping for all your cards and have them all shipped to you in one package, so you don't have to worry about paying high shipping fees for cards you order from like different sellers around the world. So that's something I really enjoy about Card Trader Zero, and it's something I would recommend if you are interested in that type of thing. Once again, sign up using my affiliate link in the description below and use code Tcg Sam to not only support the channel but also get 5% off the cards you'd already be buying anyways. But with all that being said, let's hop straight into it. Before I get into the actual cards themselves, I want to talk about maybe cards that I think could be considered problematic in the current format that we have right now. The biggest one that stands out to me is Droll and Lockbird. It seems like Droll and Lockbird is kind of like an auto win card in a lot of situations that you draw it. A lot of the top decks can almost instantly fold to this card when it's dropped on them depending on their hand. You can argue that these types of like auto win floodgate cards are just not healthy for the game, but I think another perspective to take on it is like Droll and Lockbird itself I don't think is like the big problem that we have in the current format. It feels like the fact that Droll is necessary is a problem. When decks are so strong to where normal hand traps like Ash, Imperm, Veiler, Ogre, cards like that, even when they trade 1-for-1 with cards, aren't good enough to like stop the top decks, I think that's when we know that we have a problem with like the way the top decks are able to function right now. So think about a deck like Mitsurugi Ryzeal. Like the low impact hand traps generally don't do that much unless you see an overwhelming number of them. So it kind of feels like you have to play a card like Droll and Lockbird to even have a chance of stopping them from popping off. So I think that decks like Mitsurugi Ryzeal are actually the problem, how powerful of an engine the Mitsurugi cards are. So while I do think that Droll is not necessarily a very fair card and can be pretty problematic in the formats that it pops up, I feel like the bigger problems that we need to address are the actual decks themselves. So personally don't think that Droll would get hit in this upcoming list. I can see the arguments for it, but once again, I think that the actual problems like the Mitsurugi Ryzeal deck itself should be hit instead of Droll and Lockbird. In a similar vein, you can argue that the Mulcharmies are also kind of problematic. Pruli and Fuwalos are both kind of insane against the Ryzeal deck. Against like the Mouse deck as well, Fuwalos and Meowls are also really good. And sometimes it feels like when these cards get dropped on you, there really isn't that much you can do. But at the same time, I feel like with a card like the Mulcharmies, there is some level of, I guess, counterplay to them in the sense that you can choose how much you want to play into it most of the time. Like, yes, there are going to be hands where you don't really have a choice. You kind of have to give your opponent a bunch of draws. But there are other hands you can determine, oh, maybe I have like one hand trap and like the rest of my hand is engine. Should I like fully commit into the Mulcharmy and give my opponent a bunch of draws? Or do I think that like making a half board plus my non-engine is able to stop my opponent after they've gotten 1 or 2 draws? I think that kind of gameplay is actually not too bad for the game itself. It does offer the player who gets Charmied at least a choice. Whereas with something like Droll, like there isn't really much they can do after it's resolved against them. So while I do think that the Charmies are obviously very powerful, I don't think there's really a chance that these cards are going to get hit. They're not necessarily fair, but at the same time, I think there's enough counterplay to them, and there's enough of a downside to them, like for example not being able to be used when the player gets to go first, that I think that they're probably going to stick around in the format for at least a little bit longer. And then finally, these lingering floodgate traps. I think Harpy's Featherstorm is probably the most commonly talked about one right now. There really just is very little counterplay to your opponent going like Summon Castel, Activate Thrust, set Featherstorm, outside of like stopping the Thrust itself, or using a card like Xyz's Encore on the Castel right away. But I just feel like cards like Featherstorm, where there's pretty much like zero counterplay at all if it gets to resolve, it's just not very good for the game. Like, I can actually make some arguments for keeping Droll in the Molcharmies around, but I feel like there's really no argument for Harpy's Featherstorm to still be in the game at this point. It just is sort of that degenerate floodgate that like maybe only one or two decks can play, and if you are able to like, let's say, somehow stop your opponent with hand traps, as long as they're able to get to like a card like Castel, it can just mean like Featherstorm makes it so your opponent can't play at all, no matter how good or bad their hand is. I think cards like that are just generally not very good for the game. I guess on a similar note, but I guess to a lesser extent, is Dimensional Barrier. This card isn't nearly as popular as it was before, but I also think that a card like Dimensional Barrier is still very strong. If your opponent has Dimensional Barrier, there's pretty much nothing you can do about it because we don't have cards like Red Reboot in the game anymore. So I think out of all these problems in the format right now, the ones that are most likely to get hit are the Lingering Trap Floodgates, maybe Drone Lockbird. There's some chance it gets hit, but and finally, I don't think the Molcharmies are going to get hit at all. So what cards do I think will actually have a chance of getting banned in this upcoming list? I think the first one that's interesting is actually King of the Feral Imps, and this one may seem weird because it doesn't seem that broken itself. Like, it just adds a reptile monster from your deck to your hand, and with cards like Duo Drive that add like 2 cards, like why would Konami ever choose to ban King of the Feral Imps? I think the biggest reason is because King of the Feral Imps allows the Mitsurugi deck to play the Ryzeal cards and have them be a bridge to the Mitsurugi engine itself. The crazy thing about the Ryzeal cards is that they're so good at making generic rank 4s plus Detonator. If they resolve a single one of the Ryzeal starters, they're always guaranteed to get to Detonator on their end board, but they can always just bridge into another engine to continue playing after that as well, which is kind of insane. And I think banning King of the Feral Imps would make it so Ryzeal Mitsurugi just pretty much won't be a deck anymore. Like, yes, you could technically still play the 2 engines because they don't conflict with each other, and you could still bridge into the Ryzeal part of the deck from the Mitsurugi engine, but I think that being able to cut off very easy access to the Mitsurugi side of the deck, that I think could realistically happen. The Mitsurugi engine will still obviously be very good, and if people want to play it, then they're either going to have to start playing a higher count of Mitsurugi cards, or they're going to have to start considering cards like Pre-Preparation of Rites, which has its own set of benefits and disadvantages. So I think that being able to cut off this like key bridge from the Ryzeal side to the Mitsurugi side is a fair enough hit to where it doesn't kill either of the decks, but it makes the best deck a lot more manageable and a little bit less consistent, which I think is something that we kind of need in this current format considering how dominant Mitsurugi Ryzeal has been. And then the next card I want to talk about is Caesar. I think that Caesar is probably the only part of the Fiendsmith engine I think really needs a hit. Caesar is definitely a very powerful card. Just being able to essentially have a double Solemn Warning is kind of insane. With a card like Caesar, any deck that has access to the Fiendsmith engine now has an easy way to just force out Nibiru early, or just outright negate it if the opponent lets them get here. And I think that is not really too good for the game, because I personally feel like Nibiru should be one of those cards that is sort of able to keep those like combo decks in check, or at least force them to play in a way that like respects it. But it kind of feels like any deck that is just able to spit out the Fiendsmith cards, make Caesar before like they actually commit to their plays, and just nullify Nibiru, which I don't think is very good for the game. Caesar does end up getting hit. Fiendsmith engine I think still going to be very good, but it will feel a little bit, I guess, higher risk because you will be playing to Nibiru harder. Plus, if you do actually want to end on like Fiendsmith Interruption, off of just the regular Fiendsmith combo, you can make a Desiree, but it does take away all your Fiendsmith follow-up. So that's sort of a trade-off I think that we should force Fiendsmith players to have once we actually ban Caesar. And then finally, Lingering Floodgates, like I talked about in the last section, I think Featherstorm should definitely be a card to hit. I think another one to get banned is Protoss. Even though Protoss is only really seeing play in like the Ryzeal variants, I feel like a card like this is also incredibly it's a similar boat as like Featherstorm and Dimensional Barrier in my opinion, just being able to shut off a aspect of the game and your opponent just has no counterplay to it once it resolves. I think cards like this are just not very good for the game, and the fact that the Ryzeal engine can very easily access Protoss through a card like Banshee searching Flag and then Flag searching Protoss just makes it so one of the best decks now has access to multiple different Lingering Floodgates with no counterplay. I don't think that's something we should have in the game, so I think that realistically we could see Featherstorm and Protoss and maybe other Lingering Floodgates like Dimensional Barrier as well banned. And now moving on to the limited section, I actually think outside of the bans that I talked about, there doesn't really need to be any bans on like the best decks that we're seeing right now. So I don't think you necessarily need to outright like kill Maliss or kill Ryzeal. I think a few extra hits could help make other decks a little bit more competitive, but I don't think you outright need to kill them, because at least from my perspective in the current format we have, yes, there are issues, but it sort of feels like a format where there is a fine amount of diversity that we have right now. There's enough decks that are viable, I think, and the best decks, while they're very good, are not necessarily like tier 0 where they're like the only viable decks in the format. So I think that a few extra hits to like Maliss and Ryzeal are something that's on the table, but I don't think that these decks are ultimately going to get killed. One of the big hits I think that Ryzeal could take is X Ryzeal to 1, just reducing the consistency even further and making it so they're able to see their best starter a little bit less often. X is obviously very good both going first and going second, being able to send Aggregator. So I think that hitting this in Ryzeal is probably the next best way to hit it without outright just like banning one of their cards.
Similarly with Maliss, I think that limiting Dormouse and or limiting Underground is something that could also be on the table. Once again, like Ryzeal just being able to hit like their most powerful starter or an extender just means the deck's a little bit more vulnerable to hand traps. And I think this might be like the only realistic way to like hit these decks without outright banning a card, which I'm not sure is really needed at the moment. But I am curious what you guys think. And then finally, I think a card like Mistaken Arrest is also something that like I could see Konami hitting. Like Mistaken Arrest isn't played in like every single deck right now. It does sort of follow like a similar argument as like the other Lingering Floodgates that I've talked about previously. Once this card resolves, there pretty much is no counterplay from your opponent, and if decks are just able to end on this on top of like a half board or a full board, it's probably something that Konami could have on their radar. If not banning it, just like limiting it to just making it so people aren't that likely to choose to put it in their decks because they won't see it as often. For the other limited cards, I think these cards could come off of the ban list. The first one being Heavy Storm. We already have Harpy's Feather Duster in the format, and I think that having an extra like back row removal could be pretty good for a lot of decks when going second. I don't think Heavy Storm's unfair by any means. Like, it just makes it so people will have to think a little bit more carefully about the cards that they're siding in. Yes, I know right now people can just play like Lingering Floodgates that are chainable to everything, but suppose in an ideal world we get all those banned, the best cards to side in going first suddenly become like the Solemn cards like Solemn Strike and Solemn Warning. But if Heavy Storm is back in the format, it can disincentivize people from actually playing those like cards when they go first. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that could be beneficial for the game to have right now. I don't think that Heavy Storm to 1 is really going to change that much. It's a nice extra tool for people to have when they do choose to go second or are forced to go second. And then two other cards I think could come off the list. The first one being Meow Move. There's not much to really say about this one. I've been saying this for multiple of my prediction videos now. This card, Prankies just aren't a good deck anymore, and bringing Meow Move back to 1 isn't really going to do anything. Mermaid, on the other hand, I think could actually have some impact if it does come back to 1. I think there's a chance they bring it back to 1 to sort of like push the new Orca stuff, because Orcas did get very powerful new support. And I just feel like with a card like Fiends with Requiem in the format, which is just essentially just a better Mermaid without like the discard, I feel like Mermaid is fine to have in the current format right now. It isn't going to necessarily break the game in my opinion. Yes, you can argue like, oh, your opponent can start like Ibly locking you, but with a deck like Maliss in the format right now, I don't think that's going to be very popular, because Ibly against Maliss is just not going to do anything. And I think that people are going to respect Maliss enough to where even if Mermaid does come back and they can start Ibly locking, I don't think they're necessarily going to do that. And then finally, Summon Sorceress. Yes, this is the old text, but it did get errataed recently, and I think that it's just a matter of time before this card comes off. Its new effect is interesting. From what I remember, it just locks you the monster type that like you summon from the deck, so it just means it isn't nearly as splashable as it was before. I think it could be cool. I don't think it would really do too much in the format if it does come back, so I think it's just a matter of time before they bring this back to 1. And then for the semi-limit section, I'm not really too sure we actually need any semi-limits, but I did want to talk about, I guess, a few cards where maybe there's some argument for it to be semi-limited. The first one being like Mitsurugi cards, just reducing the number of like starters and consistency cards in the deck just makes it so the deck is a little bit less oppressive, I think. Maybe Habakiri to 2, maybe Prayers to 2. It's just a small slap on the wrist hit that Konami could do to sort of say like, okay, we know that the Mitsurugi cards are kind of dominating and we have our eye on it, but we're not ready to like hit it yet, considering it's a new deck that has just recently come out. So I think maybe if there were to be any hits, it would just be a small hit like this to hit the consistency of the deck. Obviously the deck will still be very viable if they don't hit anything else, so not much to really say in terms of the Mitsu cards. And then maybe you could argue like Thrust should be at 2 if Konami refuses to hit like the Lingering Floodgates for some reason. You can argue that like their enabler being Thrust is something that's worth hitting, but I personally don't think that Thrust itself is like a problematic card. It's only as good as the cards it's able to set. So if there just aren't any Lingering Floodgates, like Thrust just isn't going to be a problem at all in my opinion. I feel like it's actually a pretty healthy going second card, but if for some reason Konami just decides they want to keep all like the Lingering Floodgates in the game, like I suppose they could hit Thrust to sort of try to alleviate that problem a little bit. And then finally, Fiendsmith Engraver. I personally don't think we need any Fiendsmith hits, considering it isn't present in like I think the top 3 decks right now for the most part. Especially if they actually hit Caesar, like I suggested. I don't think the Fiendsmith engine is going to be that big of a problem at all. Obviously, it's still very good and very splashable. And Fiendsmith is still one of the best engines that we have in the game right now. I just don't feel like the engine is oppressive enough to where it actually requires some hits. I think the solution to like hitting Fiendsmith is actually just outright banning one of like the problem cards being Caesar, like they did, sort of like what they did with like Lacrima before. So I personally don't think that Fiendsmith hits are needed, but I could see like Konami maybe randomly putting Engraver to 2 because the engine is still really good. But once again, I personally don't think that any of these are very likely to happen. I just still wanted to talk about like maybe some potential cards that could be on the radar for them to semi-limit. And then finally, for the unlimited section, I don't think any of these matter too much, but I feel like we could just like clean up the ban list a tiny bit and move cards like off the list that don't really deserve to be there. So cards like the Pearly quick play spells, like I don't know why these are still at 2. Pearly just isn't really a good deck right now. It just gets absolutely cooked by Detonator. Putting both the quick plays back to 3 could be a nice boost for the deck. Not to mention, as far as I know, they're also getting like new support in the distant future as well. So I think eventually these cards will come back to 3. I think Lightning Storm could also come back to 3. It's sort of like the same argument as I had with Heavy Storm. Just extra tools for going second, which you can't really say are like inherently broken like the Molcharmies. I feel like it could be pretty good for the game. Just giving people more tools and more reasons to play cards like Board Breakers over Hand Traps could be something that's nice. I don't think that Lightning Storm is something that's like super oppressive or anything. And then finally, I think we could put Sharvara back to 3. Unchained is a good deck, but I don't think it's a problematic deck at all. And I think just Sharvara going back to 3 would be a nice boost for that strategy. Similarly, Snake Eye Ash, Snake Eye Poplar, I think could go back to 3 without Original Sinful Spoils. I don't think this deck / engine is really going to be doing that much. And they do actually have some meta viability with a card like Snake Eye's Doom Dragon and the Millennium Engine being a thing. I do think that putting Snake Eye Ash back to 3 and Poplar back to 3 could maybe make this deck more of like a rogue or tier 2 contender, but definitely not enough to be a problem. So I think that all of these cards could come back to 3 and the meta probably wouldn't change at all, but these are just like nice, I guess, miscellaneous things we could do to clean up the ban list. So that's going to wrap it up for this prediction video. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. Do keep in mind, once again, that this is just my opinion and my opinion only. Like, you're free to disagree with me, and I've definitely been wrong on things like this before, but I figured what better time than now to talk about it, considering we could see a ban list being revealed at the NAWCQ. They have been doing it at like these big North American events, and though at the time of recording, the next big one is going to be the NAWCQ. So I do feel like there's some chance that like the new ban list is going to get dropped right afterwards. So I did want to share some of my thoughts on the format overall. Once again, don't forget to enter the giveaway if that's something you're interested in, and be sure to check out Card Trader. They're the ones that sponsored the giveaway and allowed me to do things like this for you guys. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.